I'm going to cover statewide ballot measures here. I'm going to do it big overview. I'm going to move pretty fast. Feel free to ask questions after we present, probably at the end here. For those in the audience, for you on the internet, I guess you can contact us afterwards when you see our contact info here as we move along. As a way to start, though, I'm just going to say I conferred with lots of NCSL experts about these measures. There's about 142 that have been certified to appear on the ballot. There's some more coming down the line. So these are just the ones that are kind of officially very, very likely to be on the ballot. A few of them are potentially being challenged in court. But we have NCSL experts on all sorts of topics, so a lot of the commentary I'm giving today is due to their great work. So we definitely just need to give them credit here as well. So if you have any questions that you want asked, contact us about any policy topic, and we'll get to you on those. So quick pop quiz. How many states have the citizen initiative process? Shout it out, somebody.
Do you know how many?
Arkansas, how many?
20 total states have that.
How many total states? Number. What was it?
Arkansas does.
Someone shouted something. Say it again.
Less than 50 and more than 1.
40. Okay, so we got 24 states to have the citizen initiative process, plus, if someone said 26, we would have given you that too. There's 2 states that only allow the popular veto, the popular referendum, right? And some of those 24 also allow popular referendum, but not all of them. So here's what it looks like real quick. We have the 24 states in purple here with the citizen initiative, and those 2 states with a referendum only. And you can find all that information on our websites too, on our web pages. So there's some pros and cons of the initiative process, right? We have on the pros, we eliminate voter frustration, right? They can directly, kind of that direct democracy sort of an idea. You have a more engaged citizenry. You kind of can do higher voter turnout depending on what ends up on a ballot in a given year. You can also act as a check on government and it holds elected officials accountable, especially with that popular veto, but also with just kind of general citizen initiatives too. One theme I'll kind of touch on here is that the threat of an initiative or the movement towards an initiative by either citizens or larger groups, whether they're nonprofits or corporations or businesses, those likes, can also pressure legislatures to act on that issue. Cons, you have unaccountable policymaking in a lot of ways, right? I think I have a great idea. I get enough people to sign a sheet of paper. It goes to the voters. They maybe give it a degree of thought, vote on it, it passes. If it turns out to be a really bad thing, right, there's nothing you can do to me later on. I mean, you can send me bad mail, I guess, if you want, or something like that. But there's no real accountability like there is for a legislature that passes policy and you can vote people in that office. You also have it as a kind of an unvetted, right? That contributes to that sort of unaccountable policy making that legislatures really give, right, to the process. It goes through this really intense committee process in both chambers, that whole thing, right? You have spending that is something that we're going to see addressed in a couple of ballot measures here today that are going to be on the ballot, right? You have high amounts of spending on these, and then again, that voter information may be inadequate, right? You may get competing ads in television and all of those things saying really contradictory things about a measure. So how many do we have this year so far? And these exact tallies as of Friday, right? And I think 1 or 2 have been certified to be on the ballot this year. Again, we have 89 legislative referendums. This is when the legislature passes something to place the item on the ballot, right? So even though, I mentioned people earlier this week, hey, I'm going to go talk about ballot measures on Thursday, come in here, and there's folks from maybe a state that said, oh, well, we don't have initiatives in my state. That doesn't apply. But it does, because every state can place a constitutional amendment on the ballot, right? 49 of the states have to. Delaware's the only state that doesn't have to put it before the voters to do a constitutional amendment. And then those other 24 states can do those citizen initiatives, where so far we have 40 of those, right? We have 4 of the popular vetoes or popular referendums. And then there's this other interesting category, this Constitutional Revision Commission, which I'll mention here, and then 1 advisory question, 2, which you'll see here on this other column here. Of the total, about 140, we have 92 constitutional amendments. 33 of them are statutes. 16 are bonds. That's how I separate them out. And then there's 1 advisory question in Utah. So we've already had some voting happen here, right? California had 5 measures voted on in June. 4 of them passed. 1 failed. And then Maine did ranked choice voting. Ohio did a redistricting commission. Oklahoma passed legalization of medical marijuana. Oregon had a Medicaid tax in preparation for when that state has to do a higher percentage of paying for Medicaid as part of the ACA. And then Wisconsin voted on if they wanted to eliminate the position of state treasurer, and that one also failed for the 2 of the 11. So quickly, I want to cover some themes before I touch on the states here. We have the usual suspects, right? We got bond issues, we got infrastructure, a couple gambling. One really interesting gambling one, which I'll mention when we get there, public school funding issues, pensions, medical marijuana, and Marsy's Law in several states, and I'll discuss quickly what Marsy's Law is in a moment. Then we have some rare fare, right? We got redistricting reform in a number of states here. We have Medicaid expansion in a couple states. We have the reenfranchisement of folks with felony convictions in a state. We have voter ID, ranked choice voting. You might see a theme there, right, of a lot of election-related issues going on. We also have ethics coming up in a few different states. How to raise taxes, specifically making it harder to raise taxes, is coming up in several states, and that's been a bit of a trend, right? And then we also have a feminine hygiene sales tax issue that I'll touch on in a second. And then we have a few really hot button issues. Abortion restrictions are coming up in 2 states. We got the 10 Commandments on public property in a state. We have a veto popular referendum issue on the right to work. Same with school vouchers, and popular referendum on a ban on gender identity discrimination, aka bathroom bill sort of issue, and also removing a statute in Oregon for making it harder for local and state police to enforce federal immigration, aka sanctuary city, sanctuary state issue. So I'm going to quickly touch on the states here and just give you a highlight from each, right? Here we have automatic ballot referral in Hawaii of a constitutional convention, and here we see that public education funding issue cropping up as a major theme. In Alaska, we got a new word, hopefully for some of you. It was a new word for me, anadromous fish habitat, right, in terms of protecting and permitting for salmon, essentially salmon-type fish is how I think of that there. And here we see in Alaska an example of that pressure from outside forces. The Alaska Legislature actually passed another citizen initiative. There's such a thing called an indirect citizen initiative that they put to the Alaska Legislature. This other one dealt with ethics and things like that. And the legislature actually ended up passing a bill that was close enough related so that it didn't have to go to the ballot, right? And other states have had this happen, especially this year. California, Colorado, Utah. Several states have kind of looked at this and either put a competing measure on the ballot or something like that, or passed something themselves. So then California's one of the 2 big states here. We got 17 measures in all. 5 have already been voted on. We have a repeal of the 2017 gas tax increase. And talking with some of our NSL experts, Kevin Pula and Douglas Schinkel, they see this as a national proxy issue, right? And they have kind of tallied a lot of dollars coming in from the conservative side here looking to overturn this gas tax. And ballot measures are often used, too, to help turn out voters, right? So if you get an issue that your base, your side is really passionate about, you put an issue on the ballot for that sort of reason to turn out voters. They're reducing property taxes potentially for home buyers over 55. The fiscal note on this one is really interesting, potential lost revenue there. Daylight savings time issue. More and more people seem to really dislike daylight savings time changes. Limiting dialysis revenue is kind of a topic that's gotten a little bit of national attention. And then affordable housing I've highlighted too. There's a number of affordable housing initiatives across the states, or ballot measures across the states on there. And then, unfortunately, the splitting California into 3 states, not that I was in favor of it or anything, I just think it was a really interesting thing to talk about over drinks. That is now not going to be on the ballot now, so that one will not be voted on. The courts took that off the ballot. Oregon has a number of interesting ones. They already voted in January on a Medicaid tax. They're preparing for 2020 when the federal government will only cover 90% of that Medicaid expansion. They also have an affordable housing measure that's going to kind of an interesting one I hadn't really come across before. They're also increasing it, making it harder to raise taxes for the state. And here we see that kind of quote-unquote sanctuary state issue as one of the ballot measures too, repealing a state statute that's been on the books for about 30 years. Potentially, right? When I say things, it's potential. These are ballot measures to be voted on. Automatic voter registration in Nevada. This one's a little interesting. Citizen initiative originally was passed, vetoed by the governor. Now it's going right to the people to be voted on. Here we have a sales tax exemption for feminine hygiene products, the tampon tax issue. This is definitely part of a larger trend that you've seen, mostly though so far through kind of just the regular legislative process. And you got a couple energy amendments and a couple other things here going on in Nevada. Idaho, 2 measures, which is Medicaid expansion. It's one of 17 states without. And then I love their other one. It's to authorize betting on historical, as in already happened, horse races that you will watch on video. I don't really have my head wrapped around that yet. It seems to me there's an easy way to figure that one out, but maybe not. So you got Montana has a couple interesting ones. A few states are looking to raise revenue for their higher education systems. They're also looking to regulate the ballot collection measure. So if you vote by mail, there's a concern about sending people around to just collect ballots. And if you go do that and then turn them in, right? If you do that, there's a concern from some folks who call it ballot harvesting that, you know, hey, let me collect your ballot for you, and then I could maybe vote it for you too, right? That's the kind of concern. They're also going to increase possibly their tobacco taxes to raise health care funds. A number of states are actually doing this as well, kind of, again, address an aging population in a lot of states. And then additional rehabilitation plans for new hard rock mining. Not the Hard Rock Cafe, but new hard rock mining you see here in the picture, where you need to have rehabilitation plans for the life of the mine. You also have, then in Utah, has a number of measures that are really interesting. They're going to allow the legislature possibly to call special sessions. It's only one of 15 states that the governor can only call those. They have one non-binding question on a gas tax. They're possibly going to legalize medical marijuana. They'd be the 32nd state to do that. They have a redistricting commission issue on the ballot here. One of 4 states, right, that will or have had that. There's a 5th state that will likely have it. And they're also doing Medicaid expansion as an issue along with Idaho there. Arizona rather, has a school voucher expansion popular referendum. This is a law that was passed and expanded school vouchers in the state and has been a really contentious issue there that's been into courts. Lots of folks protesting, as you'll see here. And they're also going to do a little bit of campaign finance reform and a reform to the pension systems for corrections officers, kind of trying to get their hands wrapped around a really major budgetary issue for the states. New Mexico is also doing a state ethics commission issue. One of our co-chairs of our elections redistricting committee here at NCSL was suggesting that how that's set up might be a recipe for hyperpartisanship in that state ethics commission about how those members are selected to be on there. So he's not sure it would function very, very well there. They're also going to do several bond measures like a lot of states are doing, and they have a technical fix issue for the judicial appeal process. Colorado has some interesting ones where they're going to possibly reduce the age qualification for the General Assembly down from 25 down to 21. They would become the 15th state to reduce it to that level. Right now, they're in the biggest chunk of states with the 25 age group as an age restriction there. There's also an elections fix. It's kind of interesting if you want to catch me after. They have 2 measures on congressional and then legislative redistricting for commissions. And then they have this really interesting one where they're going to remove from the Constitution the ability to make inmates perform unforced labor, or as the proponents of the measure call it, removing slavery from the Constitution. So you can pay attention to that one. And this one I wanted to use to highlight NCSL's major project on occupational licensing. When folks leave the prison, oftentimes it's hard for them to enter workforces because there's bans or limits on former prisoners, folks with convictions from entering the workforce to get a occupational license, right? And so if you're interested in that, we have major reports coming out on that, so you can check that out. Oklahoma already, and I should say passed medical marijuana legalization. They also have a Marsy's Law, Crime Victims Bill of Rights Amendment, and they're also looking to approve property taxes for public schools there, kind of continuing to do that. South Dakota has several measures on the initiative process itself. I hinted at this already. They're looking to possibly ban out-of-state contributions to ballot questions. We do not offer legal advice, but I've talked to some folks at NCSL, and they are concerned, not concerned, that's the wrong word, they're wondering how constitutional that may end up to be. But they're looking to kind of make it a little bit harder for some of these initiatives to go along. They'd revise the campaign finance lobbying initiative process. They'd increase to 55%, like Colorado recently did, to pass constitutional amendments, and they'd add a single subject rule. And they're also doing that tobacco tax increase. North Dakota is doing a major ethics commission ballot measure here. You can see Dina Butcher, the amendment sponsor here, turning in the signatures. Wisconsin, I mentioned they tried to eliminate the state treasurer position, but Matt here pictured is still there, so congratulations, Matt. So Michigan may become the 11th state to legalize marijuana for recreational use. They're also going to look at hemp, too. A number of states are kind of looking at hemp as a potentially budgetary increase, right, for their state. And then, as I mentioned, right, 4 states already will have or have had, in one state, in one case, redistricting commissions. And there's a 5th state probably coming down the line. They're verifying the signatures now. Ohio is that one state that has already voted to reform its redistricting process, and it involves a commission, but it's not quite like the other, so it's really interesting to dive into that. They also have a drug decriminalization reform measure that might be of interest to folks to check out. That will be voted on November. Indiana's going to have a state balanced budget amendment. Folks on each side of the aisle here see this as from a different thing. The state already bans taking on state debt in most cases, but not all. So you can see this as a good government measure from one side, or possibly muddying the budgetary waters, making it hard to use reserve funds, for example, is one point from one side. Missouri has already passed right-to-work legislation. They would be doing a popular referendum on right-to-work. It would be, will it remain one of 28 states that have passed that or not? They're also doing one on the gas tax, and it would be the 29th state since 2013 to increase the gas tax. They also have a really interesting bingo one that you can find me after to ask about. Arkansas is doing photo voter ID, trying to put it right in the Constitution. Third time's the charm. They've had some troubles in court. And so now they're taking it right to the people to kind of get that taken care of. Alabama, one of our 2 states with abortion policy amendments on their ballot measure this year, looking to restrict the right to abortion as an issue, right? They're also looking at possibly allowing 10 commandments on public property. Here pictured a previous instance when Alabama has placed the 10 commandments on public property. And they have a couple other amendments here that are a little more specific. Louisiana has several. I think these are all legislative referred amendments. Ones that I wanted to highlight was they may change it to where you would require unanimous juries for felonies convictions. Right now you need 10 out of 12 jurors to convict someone of a felony. They also have an affordable housing measure. And talking to Wade Fickler and Sarah Hill here at NCSL, they've seen an uptick in info requests about affordable housing. It seems to be something increasingly on folks' radar, and if you've got a chance to walk around downtown LA, you've seen how that might be an issue. And they're also looking to prohibit folks with felony convictions from holding public office for 5 years, and then a couple other tax measures. Georgia is similarly doing some, I don't want to say minor, but less lightning rod sort of issues. They have a Marsy's law on there. They're doing some different things with authorizing property taxes and the like. School district funding is one of those. Florida is a really, really interesting case this year. I'm really interested in Florida. One of their major ones is voting rights for individuals with felony convictions would be able to vote again. It's one of the few states where you essentially have to individually apply to, in this case, the governor to get your right to vote back and it's been to court. You may have read about it in the news. And then we're also going to look here at a 2/3 vote needed to increase taxes in the state. And then they have this Constitutional Revision Commission, which is an automatic thing. It's unique to Florida. It happens every 20 years. It's, I think, a 37-member commission. They go around the state. They listen to people. The members are all appointed except for maybe one. They may all be appointed. And they put out a number of measures here on all of these topics, several of which are clumped together. For example, one amendment bans offshore drilling and vaping indoors as one amendment. So there you go. South Carolina, they are looking to make the state superintendent position by the governor, and here we see the governor. That's all I got on South Carolina, but North Carolina is really interesting. 34 states so far request or require a photo ID to vote. They're looking to put that in the state constitution. They are also making it harder to raise revenue through lowering taxes in this case. They would become the 22nd states with the right to hunt and fish right in the state constitution. And then there's two measures here I've highlighted as the last two are kind of big lightning issues as the Democrats and Republicans are really fighting things out. Republicans in the legislature with a Democratic governor who has the power to do certain things with, especially with commissions and vacancies and the like. Kentucky, here we have Marsy's Law is going to be on their ballot. This is all called the Crime Victims Bill of Rights. This was first in 2008 in California and has really been making pretty steady progress across the states since then. West Virginia is one of our two states with abortion on the amendment, and then they're also increasing legislative authority over state judiciary, the state judiciary budget essentially, to be able to lower that if they choose to. Virginia is addressing a recurring problem that a number of states have kind of been fighting, possibly increasingly, with a flood abatement property tax exemption amendment. Here we see the impact of some of that. Some cities especially have kind of been built in specific places that see flooding as a recurring issue, so they're trying to help folks be able to deal with that issue. And then they're kind of tweaking a really popular measure that's been in a number of states, removing a restriction on the place of residence of a spouse for disabled veteran, or sometimes you'll see these for first responders, so that someone can move and still have that tax exemption. District of Columbia was the 9th state. We use the word state because it's easier. Since 2014, increase in general minimum wage, also for tipped employees. As I understand it, the D.C. City Council is already looking to overturn that, so that could be really interesting. Rhode Island, three bond measures. Good for Rhode Island. Connecticut, looking at a transportation lockbox amendment. This is a half-decade-long trend. A number of states have looked to do these. This essentially says that funds that are supposed to go towards transportation have to go towards transportation. And then they're looking to make it require approval for the sale or transfer of public lands. There's a really interesting two measures in New Hampshire. These are like the most New Hampshire measures you could ever possibly think of. The first one's a bipartisan measure here with Neil Kirk pictured and also Rep. Rennie Cushing. An amendment asserting that an individual's right to live free from governmental intrusion in private information is natural, essential, and inherent. I don't know what's more New Hampshire than that, other than really, really cold winters. And they also have another measure that could really increase the number of lawsuits the state sees. Massachusetts has the referendum on the gender anti-discrimination issue. They're also going to limit the number of patients nurses can look after, and they're going to create this advisory commission that would suggest U.S. constitutional amendments to overturn Citizens United and corporate personhood. Maine already voted on ranked choice voting while using ranked choice voting, which I think is really interesting. And they're also going to look to enact a payroll and non-wage income tax on the top 1.6% of earners to pay for a universal home care program for folks, I think, over the age of 65, although I may have the age wrong. They're also going to do 4 bond measures, the traditional approach to infrastructure in Maine. And does anyone know who's pictured here? Stephen King, because as my wife says, Stephen King is Maine to her. She always jokes that we're going to go find him and get his autograph. So there's Stephen King for you. I'm part of the elections redistricting team. We have the Canvas newsletter. We have lots of other resources on almost any topic there, including the census that you have questions about. Feel free to contact us. Here's my contact info if you want to find me after this. Feel free to email me or give me a call, and I'm happy to look into things. And if I'm not the right person to answer for you, I'll find them for you at NCSL. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Tim, which is what I think you more came here for.
No. Great job.
Thanks.
So surely there's a question or two about the INR, and if not, that's okay too. But does anybody have a question?
I won't be offended, but feel free.
I actually do have a question, and it's legitimate. It's not a joke. He said what state is taking their jury convictions on felonies from 10 to 12?
Louisiana.
How many states don't have a unanimous jury requirement?
Off the top of my head, I think they might be the only one.
Any other states?
Does anyone remember that? Know that?
Don't have a unanimous jury to do a felony conviction?
We have 2 as a second guess. Do I have 3?
Well, then I'll
say
3. 3 states.
3 states. No. Okay. Yeah, so
Any
they are
criminal
definitely in a
justice?
very small minority.
Huh, interesting. 12 angry men and all that. Sure.
All right, Peter, come on up.
Peter Watson, retired Senate Counsel from Minnesota. What is this Marsy's law that is sweeping the nation, and why does it need to be amended so soon after it was enacted?
Good catch. I didn't mention this. South Dakota is looking to amend Marsy's law. They passed it in 2016. They're going to roll it back a little bit.
What is Marsy's law? I don't know
Yes,
either.
and so Marsy's law is essentially, they call it the Crime Victims Bill of Rights. It enshrines in the Constitution the ability for victims of crimes, it defines victim of crime, to, for example, be notified whenever there's a hearing related to your case. The ability to be heard in courtroom whenever there's a public hearing. Things like that it enshrines right in there, and there's a list of items that you can go find. I'm not going to be able to recall them all off the top of my head, but it gives those crime victims the ability to have better information about their case as it moves through the courtroom.
So it's not based on the Marsy from the comic Peanuts?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Is it spelled differently? Thank you. What state is it from? Do you know? It must be a Marsy.
California was the first place to pass in 2008.
Thank you.
I'm curious, have you done research on whether ballot measures in primaries do better than ballot measures in general elections, or the other way around?
That's a good question, and I kind of wonder.
I think we have.
If
Somebody has.
I'm sure
Do you
someone's
know the
looked at
answer
that.
to that?
Does our other resident expert here, Wendy Underhill, have a comment?
Why don't you go to the mic, and then actually, if you'll just raise your hand, I think Wendy can bring you the mic, so you don't have to parade up here to the middle. And Arturo just texted me that same thing, I'm guessing, right? Yes.
So obviously fewer people vote in the primary, so if you can get your measure onto the primary ballot and then get your voters out, it's a good place to get that voted on.
And I feel like that's what happened in Oregon in January. They placed that Medicaid tax on there with the idea of fewer turnouts, but your folks will turn out for that.
Bob, question? While we're getting the mic to Bob, the internet has come through once again. There are 2 states that don't require a unanimous.
Hey, internet for the win.
And
What's the other
that would
state?
be, you would never guess it, Louisiana and Oregon. Who would have thought?
Hey, there you go.
Oregon.
Bob McCrody from Alabama. The one exception is hot button issues. Those are always put in the November ballot to bring out whichever side's
Right.
being attracted to get out the vote.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, and we have definitely issues on both sides of the aisle there for those.
There's definitely research on that. I mean, I know that question is somewhat settled in the academic world.
Nothing else?
Strategy. A lot of strategy.
All right.
Oh, man, I can just feel the energy in the room here on the last session of the week.
I teed it up for you, Tim.
Thank you
There
so
you
much.
go.
You worked the crowd into a
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Be able to,
That's
follow up on it.
exactly.
And I have to tell you, I really hate this setup. I mean, we got a room of 350 chairs and 100 people. We're up here on this thing. We can't see the screen. So thank you for being here. And it is the last session of the NCSL conference. There's a couple of little things that still come after this. Okay, so that looked like something was going to happen, but it didn't. And so I really appreciate you being here. It's hard to sort of get a lot of energy going in this cavernous room, but we're going to roll with it. So I love doing this. I love talking about the state elections. I'd like to wander around, but I can't do that. We do them every 2 years. Perhaps you're aware of that. The United States is pretty good about our regular biennial elections. And it's always a big year in the states, and it is again this year. There are 46 states who are holding state legislative elections this year. Of course, you got the 4 odd-year states. I see Tommy Reynolds is here from one of them. I hope you're feeling good about this year's elections. And Mississippi, New Jersey, Louisiana, and Virginia, who do their elections in the odd-numbered years. And you've got a handful of state senates which have 4-year terms, and they all run at the same time, so they skip over every 2 years. Not a bad idea, right? For New York, maybe you could put this in. New Mexico, Minnesota, Kansas, and South Carolina fall into that category. So only the House is up in those states, although Minnesota has an interesting special election this year, which we'll talk about. There are 36 governor's races this year. That's sort of the normal 4-year cycle. That's a big number that is usually in the off year of the presidential cycle. So there are 36 governors. And I rarely say this. I don't want you to, please don't tell anybody that I said this. But it might be a bigger year on the governor side than the legislature side. I think usually the legislative elections are kind of the big kahuna, but maybe this year it's the governor's races because there's a lot riding on those governors, and more of them are toss-ups than some of the legislative chambers. Again, I'll get to that in a second. So again, 6,066 legislative seats up for regular election. That's about 82% in 44 states, and then there's 4 states where only 1 chamber is up. So it's a big election year. Where do we stand now? There are 31 states that are in the GOP column, 14 that are Democratic, and 4 that are divided between the 2 parties. Anybody here from Minnesota? I think I saw, well, Peter, of course, and yeah. So why is Minnesota a split legislature? Because we know that the Republicans control the Minnesota legislature. Well, through a series of events, there's a vacancy in a district outside of St. Cloud. Keep me honest, Minnesotans. And so there's a Senate vacancy, so it's now 33-33, 33 Republicans and 33 Democrats. So it is technically a tied Senate chamber as of today. There's no chance for a session before November, so it really has no practical impact that I'm aware of, although again we have Minnesota experts, you could ask them. And there will be a special election this fall for that seat. Talk about that more in a second. Nebraska's 90 Nebraskans in here? No? That's good. It's always good to identify the state we can make fun of as we continue. So we'll just poke fun at Nebraska from here on out. No, the Nebraskans technically run as nonpartisans, but any guess as to what party sort of really runs the Nebraska legislature? That would be the GOP. So I have what I call the, and then again we show that the New York legislature is Democratic, but it's not. So here's what I call the get real version of state legislative control, because it factors in there's a coalition in the Alaska House where 4 Republicans have sided with 18 Democrats, and they functionally control the Alaska House. And again, in New York, there's a coalition of 1, I guess now, 1 Democrat who has sided and organizes with the Republicans, Simcha Felder, who will stay with, he pretty much is a Republican in terms of his functioning role as a state senator. And there's a long and winding tale about the independent Democratic caucus, 8 Democrats who have been organizing with the Republicans in New York, but they now say that they will be Democrats next time. I guess they just choose after every election. The Connecticut Senate is tied, and then Nebraska is really Republican. So when you factor that in, 31 Republican states, 13 Democratic states, and 6 that are divided. Now, interestingly, this is the most Republican states in American history. So Republicans are at their highest point in American history in terms of control of legislatures, in terms of on paper, the majorities in the states, which is fascinating. So we are living in a GOP world when it comes to state legislature control. They also are at a relative high point in terms of the total number of seats. Republicans control over 55% of all legislative seats now, close to 57%. Democrats are down. You can see this is as of, including some of the special elections we've had this year. Democrats are down to about 43% of all state legislative seats. Who knows how many legislative seats there are? 6,066 are up this year. There are a total of 7,383. I heard Arturo say it back in the back. And so of the 7,383 legislative seats, roughly 50.5% Republican and 43.5% Democratic. Now, what's interesting about this is look at that big, and I really wish I could be down there to do the laser pointer. Oh, I can almost do it from here. Can you actually see that out there, or am I imagining that? So, so you can see the Democrats really dominated legislatures, peaking close to 70% in the 1974 post-Watergate election. and only a slight drop down in 1976. So even though this is sort of, relatively speaking, one of the strongest periods in American history for the GOP, it is nowhere close to the strength that Democrats had back in the 1970s before a sort of long and steady decline into the Gingrich Revolution in 1994, and then parity for about a decade, and now we've seen the Republicans surge over the last several elections. Governor's Party, there are 33 Republican governors, 16 Democrats, and 1 independent. That's Governor Walker in Alaska. It is Walker, right? How did I get that wrong? And then when you combine it all together, you got 25 Republican states, 6 that are Democratic, and 19 that are divided. And I'm sort of taking into account, the get real version of state legislatures before. So that's kind of where we stand heading into this election. There are a number of dynamics that will play into this, and I think the most compelling reason why this is almost certainly going to be a Democratic year at the state legislative level is just the history of it. There have been 29 midterm elections since 1902. And in 27 of those, the party in the White House loses seats in state legislatures. It's about as much of a take it to the bank kind of trend that you can find in American politics. 27 out of 29, party in the White House loses seats in state legislatures to the tune of, on average, 410 seats in the midterm. So the president's party loses roughly 410 seats on average. In fact, I've got it on my slide, 412. Whew, I'm glad I was close there. So the party in the White House loses roughly 412. I put the sad emoji there for the people who are texting and wanted to see a quick interpretation. You can't even see the slides, and you laughed at that. Thank you. I can just on the corner. So there are 2 exceptions. 1934, we're in the teeth of the Great Depression, and the Democrats under FDR have huge gains in state legislatures, over 1,000, the biggest gain of all time. Of course, there's only 2. And then as we're ramping up to war in Iraq in 2002, post 9/11, Republicans actually gained seats in legislatures in 2002. It was a rough set of midterms for President Obama and the Democrats, losing over 700 seats in 2010, and there's a lot of question about, are we in a 2010 environment this year, or are we in some other environment this year? And we'll find out. We'll talk about that again some more. Let's talk about specific battleground states, for which I have to get my notebook, which I forgot to bring up with me, because my memory on this is getting a little bit feeble. So let me run down. So what's interesting about the battlegrounds is that there are relatively fewer than normal, and that's because Republican advantages are so strong in a number of states. So states that we would normally sort of see in the battleground column for state legislatures aren't necessarily showing up unless there is a big wave. So the whole question here is, what is the size of the wave? Because I will tell you, there will be a wave. The Democrats are going to have a wave this year. Will it be a big wave or a small wave? That's the question we're talking about. Very, very unlikely. Now, granted, we are 95 days from the election. So anything I say, I have no responsibility for, because so much can happen between now and 95 days from now, which is like 10 eternities in political life. But as of today, it's pretty clear there's going to be a wave for the Democrats. History certainly tells us that. There are a number of other signs pointing to that. So these are the battleground states kind of as we see today. Let me go alphabetically. The Alaska House, again, and I don't have the chamber on here, but in Alaska we're talking about the House. 17 Democrats, 21 Republicans. There are 2 independents who vote with the Democrats, making it effectively 21-19. And then there are 2 Republicans who vote with them. I'm sorry, 3 Republicans who vote with them, which make it 22-18 with a Democratic coalition. But it will be a very competitive race for the governor. Could be a 3-way race for the governor. And so the Democrats are going to have to work hard. In some ways, this is an opportunity. This is a pickup opportunity for Republicans. Even though on paper they have the numerical advantage, they could win control of the Alaska House. So interestingly, alphabetically, the first one I talk about is actually a Republican possible pickup. And I said is a Democratic wave year of some size. The Arizona Senate. It's been a while since the Arizona legislature has been sort of on the battleground in play list, but it's 13 Democrats and 17 Republicans. There are 3 Senate districts in Arizona that the Republican won by less than 10%, so a 5% switch flips that. So it's definitely going to be interesting to watch Arizona. I don't have the Arizona House on here, but it's certainly possible that if it's a big wave, you see the Arizona House show up on the battleground chart. The Colorado Senate is identical to the Maine Senate. There are 18 Republicans and 17 Democrats in both the Colorado and Maine Senate, so both of those sort of top of the battleground list where Republicans are hanging on to the majority by thread. The Colorado Senate, there are 2 Republican seats that are less than 8% wins last time, and then there are 17 seats up in the Colorado Senate, and 10 of those are Republican incumbents, and 7 are Democratic, so just kind of a numbers. They're defending more turf. And then there are 2, the big target seats in Colorado are 2 Republican Senate seats that actually Hillary Clinton won in 2016. So if you had to say there's a state that the Democrats are really licking their chops about, it would probably be the Colorado Senate. And but the Colorado governor's race is sort of still in the toss-up category. So it doesn't mean Democrats could wind up with full control in Colorado. Now this is interesting. Again, I'm doing this, well, then there's Connecticut, which is currently tied, 18 Democrats, 18 Republicans. So you could see that as a state that could go either way, but I think this is one where the Democrats are feeling fairly good. There are a number of districts in that Connecticut Senate that are up this year that Hillary Clinton won. So I think they feel pretty good about winning the majority back in the Connecticut Senate. The Florida Senate, now, this is the odd one. I think this is interesting, too, and this might just be a coincidence. In 1992, every single legislative chamber in the South was controlled by the Democratic Party. They had a majority in every single chamber in the South was Democrats. The first chamber in the South to go Republican was the Florida Senate. So now we're seeing a Florida Senate back on the battleground table as a possible Democratic pickup. It's probably the longer shot category of these battleground states that I have on here, but it is certainly within the realm of possibility, depending on the size of the wave. The Republicans lost a seat last year in a special election, and so it's now 23 Republicans, 16 Democrats. There's 1 Republican vacancy, so it's really 24-16. There are 3 districts that Hillary Clinton won in those Florida Senate districts, so it's certainly one that I think would be maybe the big prize for the Democrats if they could flip that and maybe start some sort of trend back in the South. Talked about the Maine Senate just a little bit. All the seats are up. It's 18 Republican, 17 Democrat. Unlike Colorado, all the seats are up, not just half the chamber. And again, there are a number of Clinton districts. But they're also interesting in Maine. There are 4 Democratic senators in districts that Donald Trump won. So Maine could really kind of be a battleground for both states. The Minnesota Senate, now, again, it's a St. Cloud district, and I looked this up, and it was about, I think Fishbaugh won like 70-30 or something. It's a pretty solid Republican district. So I have on the ballot. I really debated whether or not to put the Minnesota Senate on here as a battleground state. But, you know, given the climate and how some of the special elections have changed, it is certainly something you got to pay attention to, because the Minnesota Senate, in theory, could certainly flip. New Hampshire House. There are 400 members in the New Hampshire House. I assume most of you are aware of that. It is, I think there's you have to serve in the House at some point in your life if you live in New Hampshire, is my understanding. That's
half the people here are probably constituent.
Or you've all right. Their districts are about the size of a big high school in Los Angeles, and so it's like running for class president, I guess, at a giant high school. Right now, it's 227 Republicans, 173 Democrats. So Democrats need 28 seats to flip the New Hampshire House back. It has been one of the most pivoting chambers of all state legislative chambers. The New Hampshire House has gone back and forth a number of times in the last 4 or 5, 3 of the last 6 elections. It's flipped from one party to the other. So New Hampshire is definitely one to keep an eye on. The New Hampshire Senate, also very close, 14 Republicans, 10 Democrats. All the seats are up. And Democrats only need 2, obviously, to tie it. And again, there are 2 districts that Hillary Clinton won. So those are pretty low-hanging fruit, I think, from some perspective. We talked about the New York Senate. Democrats only need 1 seat to sort of give them what would appear to be a functional majority, and then it would be up to this independent Democratic caucus, the IDC as it is called, as to would they hold their alliance that they've made with the governor and stay on the Democratic side of the fence or not. So definitely the New York Senate. The Washington House and Senate are both within 2 seats, Democratic majorities. Again, I put them on the battleground list. Democrats are most likely going to hold on to both of those chambers unless something really changes between now and November. And then finally the Wisconsin Senate. where the Democrats have picked up 2 seats in special elections, so they are sort of on the proverbial roll. It's only 18 Republicans and 15 Democrats, so all they have to do is flip 2 more seats, and they win back the Wisconsin Senate that was historically Democratic for a number of years, but the Republicans have controlled it for, I think, almost 10 years in Wisconsin. So those are your battleground chambers. There are 13 chambers in 11 states. But again, what's interesting, in 2010, I had 21 battleground chambers, and it turned out 24 switched parties because the wave got much bigger in 2010. Obama lost almost 700, the Democrats lost almost over 700 seats, and it wound up sort of swapping them in a number of places. So what's striking to me when I was sort of doing this, thinking this all through, was there are relatively few battleground chambers compared to what I would have expected, given that we are in kind of a first midterm of a president who's sitting at 43% approval rating. Talk about that a little more before I wrap it up. Let's look at the governors. This is straight off of Charlie Cook. I decided to trust Jennifer Duffy does Charlie's governor's analysis, and I'd be happy to talk about some of these. I'm just going to do the top lines. 9 states are considered toss-ups. There are a lot of interesting ones here, and we don't have time to talk about it. I think perhaps the most interesting to me is Wisconsin, where well, it's not a toss-up, but it's in the now lean Republican category. It's sort of on the fence, and thank you, sir. And, Governor Walker is, there are 2 polls now showing him behind the potential Democratic nominee Evers. And then in Georgia, there are now 2 public polls showing Stacey Abrams with a slight lead over Secretary of State Matt Kemp, who won the primary in a runoff just about a week ago. So those are, to me, the most interesting of these. But there's a lot of interesting stories if I had time to get into some of these governor's races. And again, I hate to say this, but there's probably as much or more action on the governor's side this time than the Democratic side, or on the governors than the legislative side of the equation. So a couple reasons why these elections matter, because states control roughly $1.5 trillion in public spending every year. So it matters because legislators, and I know we have some here, you guys are doing the stuff that matters to people in constituencies. But it also matters who controls states, because redistricting looms on the horizon. Is Kim here? I thought I might have seen Kim Brace, because I borrowed this from Kim. I actually gave him credit. So we've done the apportionment projections based on the 2017 population estimates. I'm sorry, the 2017 population estimates. So there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 seats that could, congressional seats, U.S. House seats, that could be shifting from the sad blue states to the happy, sunny yellow states on this map. Anybody see a trend when you look at those arrows? Yeah, they all go from the Midwest to the South and the West, and from the the Northeast, New York and Pennsylvania and Rhode Island. Rhode Island only has 2 seats, but they could be giving it up. Montana only has 1; they could be getting their second one. Of course, still in most of the cases, even with the initiatives, state legislatures will be charged with drawing these congressional maps. So it's a redistricting election. There are 800, a little over 800 legislative seats will be elected in this election who will draw redistricting maps. So you with me on that? In other words, Senate seats that are not up again for 4 years, about 800 of them will be chosen in this election. So this is the first redistricting election. It's the little kahuna. Next year is the big, or 2 years is the big kahuna when you really establish who draws the lines. But this is sort of the little kahuna redistricting election. So let's talk about a couple of things before I wrap it up. The president's approval rating is sitting at 41.3. This is from 538. You can choose your favorite presidential approval aggregate website. This one does most of them. Even if you make it likely voters, it's a little better for Trump. You take it just all adults, it's a little better for the Democrats. But here's some interesting stuff. Number one, there's a guy named Steve Rogers. Anybody know who Steve Rogers is? Captain America. It's a different Steve Rogers, because I wish it was Captain America. But there's another guy named Steve Rogers who is a professor at the University of St. Louis. Not Captain America, unfortunately. Or maybe he is. I don't know. So anyway, Steve Rogers at the University of St. Louis has done some fascinating academic research, and he says that the approval rating of the president, regardless of what party, has a 3 times greater effect on a legislative election than anything else the legislator does in their campaign. So in many places, in many ways, the popularity of the president will sink or raise your candidacy as a candidate for the legislature. So now that doesn't mean you don't have to work your tail off, because you're still trying to work on the margins, and so many of these races come out close that you can't just sort of say, well, there's nothing I can do, my team's unpopular or my team's not popular. You still got to work like crazy. But the president's approval rating has a very strong influence on how legislatures turn. President Trump is the first president in modern polling history. So Gallup's been doing approval since 1944 with Harry Truman. And Trump's the first president who's never been above 50%. So all presidents at some point in their presidency were over 50%, many of them way over 50%. So this is one of the things that Democrats are sort of banking on, is that the president's approval rating is sitting right there. Does anybody know anybody, and I mean this sincerely, there's like 100 people here I counted. Does anybody know anybody who just hasn't decided how they feel about President Trump? Right? I mean, you guys all know at least 10 people who you've talked to about their opinion. People pretty much have decided if they like this president or don't like this president. There's not a lot of wiggle room. And his number, look at this, it's as steady as any president in approval rating history. It has been in that tight zone between roughly 40 and 45% the entire time. So it's not like people are moving on this thing. So this is going to be one of the biggest factors. 3 times greater influence than anything else you do is the president's approval rating. So will the president's approval rating change between now? There's 95 days to go. We will see. Here's the interesting thing about, you also hear that he is incredibly popular with the Republican Party, with his base, and that's a big question. Will that help Republican candidates in legislative elections? Can Trump get the base out to turn out? And there's some indications that he can and he might. There's also some danger signs there. But Pew just put this out yesterday, and I had to throw it up here, and I don't know if you can really digest it from where you are. But basically what it's telling us is that Obama, George W. Bush, Clinton, this really sort of starts with Clinton, where there's this enormous gap on approval between the parties. So you love your person and you don't like the other team. And it's gotten, now we're at an all-time high, although Obama wasn't much off. Democrats loved Obama at about 85% toward the end, and Republicans were giving him a 14% approval rating. So what we now know is that we really are moving into these sort of parliamentary kinds of status, where people are voting more party. They like their team and they don't like the other team. And this is an interesting trend, and I think will have an effect on these legislative elections. So, and I'm just teeing up a couple things. This is consumer sentiment. And you can see after, it's been in that sort of high around 100 range and has stayed there. So, you know, consumers are generally happy. Americans are happy about the economy. Now this is, I'm going to pause on this for a second, because this is perhaps the most interesting slide that I have. Okay, so the generic ballot test, they ask voters, which party do you want to control Congress? And they say Republican or Democrat. And we have taken that data and taken it back to 1944 when the generic ballot test, as far back as that goes, political scientists did this, I didn't do this, and said, just given the seat swings based on the approval or the generic ballot, what would you expect to be the overall seat swing in state legislatures? So as of today, if the generic ballot said Republicans are up 6, then Democrats are still projected to gain about 224 seats. But if the generic ballot test is, we like Democrats plus 6%, then Democrats are likely to gain about 500 seats in legislatures, just on the mathematics of the formula. Okay, so it's not who it is, it's just the math of the seat swings over time since the 1940s. So you know what the generic ballot is right now? 7. I hope you said 7. It's plus 7 for the Democrats. So just based on this math, again, we see a wave coming for the Democrats. Now, where will that wave be? That's a good question. And that's what really matters. So I'm going to wrap up. There are 95 days to go, and there are some reasons why Republicans need to be concerned, and they are, because I know a lot of Republicans who are here. One, there's just the midterm history. It is clearly sort of a year for the Democrats. It is the proverbial wave year. There are more Democratic challengers than ever before, according to Steve Rogers, who's been tracking this candidate data. So Democrats have gotten their candidates out, which, by the way, is a common trend in midterm elections. The party in the White House seems to have a tougher recruiting year, and that's been studied. This is sort of academic. And the party out of the White House has more success recruiting candidates. Clearly, there's more Democratic enthusiasm. And there are a couple of ways to measure that. One is sort of asking them in polling about, are they energized, are they planning to vote? Likely voters, higher for Democrats, lower for Republicans. Also, the turnout in the primaries, up not across the board, but up in about 3/4 of the Democratic primaries and only up in about 1/4 of the Republican primaries. So there's clearly the voter turnout demonstrates Democrats are more enthusiastic as of today, 95 days to go, than the Republicans. The special elections. It has been a very good year and a half for Democrats in special elections. And by the way, they are outperforming Hillary Clinton in across, not across the board, but they're outperforming Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election in these special elections by around, somewhere between 5 and 10% generally. So they are, Democrats are clearly doing better than they did when Hillary Clinton was at the top of the ticket in 2016. They have won 24 special elections, including moving the Washington Senate into the Democratic column by flipping a Republican seat in a Washington special election. Then there were the odd year elections where Virginia and New Jersey, Democrats picked up 15 seats in the Virginia House. No one thought they could do that. No one saw that coming. So is this a Virginia election? Maybe, maybe not. But by the way, Republicans have also won a handful of special elections, and they've had a couple of party switchers that have gone their way. And then, of course, Trump's approval rating is stuck right there between 40 and 45%. And the data would show that that means good year for Democrats. Okay, so if you're the Democrats, what you should be concerned about, and if you're Republicans, what are you excited about? One, you do have Donald Trump, and he can motivate the base and turn them out like no one in history. I mean, his IV in the base of the Republican Party is, I think, unprecedented. He can communicate directly to them through his Twitter feed and through Fox News in a way that no other president has been able to do. Most presidents would have killed to have that ability to sort of get their base turned out and excited about an election. Now, how will that play out? We don't know. Number two, President Trump has said that he is going to campaign 6 days a week. Starting in September, I think he said. So he will be out there, again, trying to get the base turned up on the Republican side. They also, all the economic indicators, almost all, there was a little bad housing data yesterday that sort of spooked the markets a little bit, but most of the economic data is pretty dang strong. That was a great GDP number. There certainly will not be another GDP number before the election. Because it takes a while for them to compute it. You're looking and thinking there will be, but it comes out like a month after the quarter. So the jobless numbers are great. The market is okay. It's up like 15% over the last year. It's, of course, just up like 2% year to date. But there's a great economic message if the Republicans can harness that. And then, of course, they have the districts. The Republicans had the redistricting pin for the most part, and so they're still running in districts that are favorable to them, and that's something they can fall back on. So, is there a wave coming? Yes, there is. The question is it this wave or is it this wave? And right now we're 95 days out. We just don't know. But we do know that we're polarized. Charlie Cook had a fascinating piece of data on this. In 2016, for the first time in American history, every U.S. Senate race went the same way as the presidential race in that state. That had never happened before. So ticket splitting, it's not happening as much as it used to by any stretch of the imagination. So I just have all these little things I want to throw out there. I think I've forgotten about half of them. So that's it. I'm wrapping it up. I could say thank you and drive safely, or we could take a question or two. Does anybody have a question? Bob's ready to clap and get out of here, I think, when don't ask a question out of obligation. Yes.
Have you ever looked at the impact of early voting? You talk about elections like that. Oh, have you ever looked at the impact of early voting? You point to elections like they're a set date, and anymore they're not. And does that make any difference?
Well, I think it makes a big difference on the campaign side of the equation. I think both parties have, continued to strategize about how they manage their particular set of rules in the, inside the campaign world. I don't know. I haven't seen anything that it's changed, kind of the trends of who has the advantage or who doesn't. Now, I would be surprised if somebody's said that, oh, this elections mechanism, this tweak helps us, and this one helps us. Wendy is our, elections administration legal expert, law expert. So I can tell you that every change to election law, there's some team of people who run it through the partisan calculator and say, is this going to help us or hurt us? And I have this theory that election law reform only happens when both parties think like, well, this might help us, or this might hurt. I don't think this is going to hurt us, because parties are reluctant to do things to the process that we're going to have a deleterious effect on them. So, kind of an I don't know kind of answer, but I don't think there's any dramatic shift in like which party has the advantage based on the mechanics that have changed.
Very interesting, but what would be the influence of money in those campaigns for the next results?
Yeah. I mean, well, the Democrats, from what I hear and from talking to a number of folks without revealing too much, are doing quite well this year. Republicans are doing fine. So you might have a situation in some cycles where one party would have an advantage or not have an advantage, but I think both parties are going to be pretty well funded this time around. So I don't think either side has a distinct financial advantage going into the election, and I think the Democrats are in better shape than they've been for a while, for a variety of reasons. They've got some at the top of their fundraising apparatus are a guy named Obama and a guy named Eric Holder, his Attorney General, who I think have actually done some work on it, have actually not just talked about it, but they've gotten involved to help them raise money. Is that what you're asking about?
Another question, is that important to spend as much money for any election?
Well, that's sort of a devil's bargain. Is it important to spend the money? Mainly because you don't want to not spend the money and find out you should have spent the money. And every time you lose by, 100 votes or 20, maybe if I'd just done that mailer or just done that extra spot. Having said that, Hillary Clinton outspent Donald Trump by, I think, almost double. So a lot of it has to do with the free media and how clever you are. So there are ways to combat money, but yeah, money matters in elections. There's no doubt about that. You got to get your message out, so you got to have resources to do that. Yeah.
Yes. Could you comment on the effect or strength of the governor's coattails on the state house races? Relatively small.
There has been some research on that, and it doesn't hurt to have a competitive governor's race and a well-funded governor, because then you benefit from the get out the vote, that the top of the ticket is doing. And I think it definitely helps to have if you have a popular incumbent, running. But again, presidential approval matters 3 times more than anything else. So, another question? Yeah.
I am a staffer for Senator here in California, and on the reapportionment slide, right before you clicked off of it, California was red and shaking.
Yes.
And I just want to make sure.
It was an earthquake hit California, right? It did that, so it's tied into a seismology tool. I did this. That's what they call a legacy slide. So I pulled it from my presentation 10 years ago because I wanted to use those arrows, and I had to readjust them for this year. And 10 years ago, California didn't get a district, and they were unhappy because it was the first time since statehood that California's congressional delegation did not grow. And so I forgot to take that out because I didn't preview it. So you caught me. Did you see how fast I tried to move? Yeah, that was a really nice catch, actually, because I didn't. The prepared presenter would have gone through their slides in slideshow and would have seen it. And when I saw it, I'm like, oh, that's from last time, and I tried to. But you got me. That was nice. Did anybody see the typo? Yeah, that's great. I thought so.
We always love that. Yeah.
Anybody else? Bless you all. I give you the benediction to have a really safe trip back to home, and thank you very much for being here. And I'm around if you have questions. Patrick, too.
Thanks.
And Lou Cannon had to leave. I wanted to call out Lou and tell him how much we love him. So. Hi.